This is a streaming audio check. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good evening, and thank you for watching. My name is Hank Stevenson. I'm the co-founder of the Arizona Agenda, a newsletter covering Arizona politics and government, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is a sponsor of this event. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections host debates so voters have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and vote informed. Candidates that have a contested general election have been invited to participate in this debate. The questions that will be asked this evening are coming directly from voters. Leading up to the debates, Clean Elections conducted outreach to voters across the state asking for questions for the candidates. Additionally, Clean Elections surveyed voters to learn what issues are important to them. This survey data, along with input from experienced journalists at the Arizona Agenda, the Arizona Capital Times, and the Green Valley News, have been utilized to guide the discussion so it best serves voters. Of course, we want to hear directly from you, the voter. So voters that are watching this debate live, you can submit questions at any time. You can do that via email, debates@kc-a.com. You can text them in to 480-808-1814, or you can call them in 480-937-1253. We screen questions for clarity to eliminate duplication, speeches, or personal attacks on candidates. This debate is scheduled for about a half an hour, so we may not get to all audience questions, but we will do our best. Tonight, we're hearing from a candidate in Legislative District 7, which covers parts of northern and eastern Arizona, from southern Flagstaff through Payson and Cholo, down to Globe and Oracle in the southern end of the districts. Candidates will have 1 minute for opening and closing statements and 1 to 2 minutes for responses to voter questions. Our goal tonight is to connect candidates and voters so our electorate may vote informed. Tonight, we've got Kyle Nitschke, an organizer with the Arizona Students Association, who's running for the state Senate. He's a Democrat. Republican State Senator Wendy Rogers decided not to come tonight. And your House candidates are David Cook and David Marshall, two Republicans who are running unopposed for the 2 House seats. And at this point, Kyle, why don't you kick us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Take a few minutes for your opening statements.
Awesome. Well, good evening. My name is Kyle Nitschke. I am your Democratic candidate for Legislative District 7. And I'm the son of a public school teacher, and that is why I'm running today. Our K-12 education system has been terribly underfunded for decades here in the state, and our students, teachers, and parents are paying the price. And not just K-12 education, but pre through K through higher education as well. We actually fund the Department of Corrections more than we fund every single community college and university in the state. And on a broader scale, I mean, our priorities at the state legislature, how we budget is backwards. We need to be investing in families and in workers and in the climate. And we need to ensure that reproductive rights are accessible for all people in Arizona. I am running as a Clean Elections candidate, so that's why I'm not at a fancy dinner like Wendy right now fundraising a bunch of money. She's spent the last year traveling the country. She's raised $3 million saying that the election is stolen. As a Clean Elections candidate, I went door to door and collected $205 contributions from voters living in the district to be able to get my Clean Elections money. And I spent the last several months traveling the district, talking to voters, and making sure that when I am elected as your state senator, that I'll do a great job for you in the legislature.
All right, cool. All right, Kyle, we'll keep this very informal. It's just us and the voters tonight. So feel free to kind of riff on these ideas, but I want to start off with a little bit about jobs and the economy. And one thing I like to ask Democrats especially is, what is the most consequential economic policy that Governor Doug Ducey has created in his 8 years as governor? And by consequential, I would like you to focus on the positive things that you think the governor has done in his tenure.
I guess we could say some of the positives have been some of the corporations that we've seen coming into Arizona. Although, you know, the negative has been they come in and they pay no taxes. The positive is, you know, we do have jobs for our workers and such. You know, we have seen some big businesses come into Arizona, I guess, over the last decade. That can be attributed potentially to some of Ducey's policies. You Yeah, that's about as nice as I can be, I think.
And what's the most consequential in the negative aspect?
I mean, it's been the fact that these corporations are here and they're not paying taxes. We can have growth and we can talk about the balance between, our corporations and the amount of taxes they pay. But I think where our worker rights are currently and how we're in Arizona right to work state and workers don't really have as much power as they do in other states, that putting the power in the corporations is definitely challenging.
Okay. I want to ask a little bit about infrastructure too. Your district is largely rural, large and rural. I'm curious, what infrastructure projects in your district, if any, would you fight to get state appropriations in the budget process to fix up the roads around there? What are the biggest needs in Legislative District 7?
I mean, I think it's been really awesome. The infrastructure bill has been able to help us start getting fiber optic internet down the I-17. I think where we need to invest on an infrastructure standpoint is actually not so much our roads and stuff, but we need to clear our forests out. And that's where we need to be putting people to work, is in clearing our overcrowded forests and making sure that we're resilient to fire. And our fire and our watersheds in northern Arizona are deeply connected, so that when we have a fire, it's going to affect drought in the long term and flooding. And so I think by helping clear out some of our forests and doing forest thinning will protect our houses and homes and infrastructure that's already here in Flagstaff. But we need to protect what we have by clearing out the forests and making them more fire safe.
Okay. Obviously, inflation is a huge problem in this country right now. What can you as a state lawmaker do, if anything, to help ease that burden on Arizonans?
I think inflation has really been driven by corporate greed nationally. I think sometimes people try to point us to, the PPP loans or some of the bills that have been passed over these last couple of decades, as far as these last couple of years, haven't affected inflation. But we've seen corporate profits through the roof since the start of the pandemic, or since the year after the pandemic. We've seen corporate profits more now than they ever have been before, and that's where we need to do what we can. We need to rein our corporations in.
Okay. Moving on to some healthcare stuff, I want to ask you, speaking of the pandemic, looking back at the last couple of years of COVID, how do you think Arizona managed the pandemic? And if you can, tell me one area where Arizona did very well and one area where you think we failed.
I mean, it's a tough question because I feel like we're still not really appropriately addressing the pandemic. I mean, the fact that we need to still be wearing masks indoors when we're around other people. I know that's not popular in Arizona, but we need to protect immunocompromised people, and we're really not. We're acting like the pandemic is over, and it's really not. People are still getting very sick. Testing rates are we're just not testing enough now. We don't even know that COVID is out there. As far as Arizona's response, I mean, I think it's ridiculous that we went into lockdown and had a curfew when we had some rioters in Scottsdale, but we didn't do any sort of lockdown or curfew or anything around COVID. I think we've played political games here in Arizona around COVID, and even federally, we're still not properly taking all the steps that we need. I mean, the fact that masking is not mandatory in all of our schools in Arizona, it's a little ridiculous. I mean, I know that's not popular with folks. But I think we need to take this health crisis seriously.
Is there anything you can point to, a positive, an area where Arizona handled COVID really well?
I mean, I think at least I had a pretty positive experience with getting my vaccination once they were out. I think our initial rollout of vaccines was done decently enough. I thought that's a positive, right? 1
point for Arizona. So I want to talk a little, obviously, about abortion. The Dobbs ruling, essentially overturning Roe versus Wade precedent. Right now in Arizona, abortion is still legal, although that could change at any moment. We're all waiting for a court decision that could take us back to putting in place a territorial era law that would ban all abortions except for to save the life of a mother. I assume you are pro-choice, correct me if I'm wrong, but if that's the case, then I wonder what parameters to abortion, if any, do you think could be justified?
Yeah, I think there should be no parameters to abortion care. Abortion is health care. Abortion is a human right. It should be safe, legal, and we need to work towards making it free. And I think even before we had the Roe v. Hobbs decision and before the 15-week abortion ban in Arizona, we did not have enough access to abortion in the state. As a very rural district here, you still have to travel to Phoenix to go get an abortion before we have Roe. And now I think we only have operating abortion clinics in Tucson, and I know the ruling is coming out this week, and who knows what's going to come of that. But yeah, I'll make it very clear, abortion should be safe, legal, and free. We need to make sure that everyone has the right to have an abortion, no matter what the circumstance. It's a life-saving medical procedure. It's ridiculous that it's politicized, and it's scary, and it's dangerous what is going on right now here in the entire nation. And also, abortion is still very legal if you're rich. You know, you just go travel across state lines, do whatever you need to do. Abortion bans only are going to hurt people.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about education too. The question here is, do you believe Arizona's K-12 public education system as a whole is adequately funded? Oh, let me go to the next one though, because I think I know your answer there. If not, how much more should the state spend, and how specifically should we raise that money? What taxes would we be increasing, or new sources of revenue should we be opening up to pay for education? So yeah. Go ahead, Kyle.
So first, our K-12 education is obviously not well funded. We've been getting these lies a lot with the voucher people who are protesting in front of our Save Our Schools referendum petition, saying that education is more funded than ever has been in the state. And it's just not a truth. On a per pupil basis, as far as funding per our students, we're lower now than we were before the recession. We are not properly funding education. To the second part of the question, I think that, Prop 208 that we passed a couple of years ago would have been a really great thing. If the corrupt judges if our corrupt judges didn't just strike it down. I think taxing the wealthy and taxing corporations to pay for stuff that we all benefit for is a great idea. We know that when we have an Arizona high school graduate, if we pursue them, or if we push them to pursue higher education, when they graduate from Arizona University, they're going to put an additional $660,000 into state property federal tax over their lifetime. Education is the most important investment we can make here in a state. And I think we can get most of that money from, again, like that proposition we already passed. We don't need to rethink the wheel. The wealthy and corporations are not paying enough taxes here in the state. A lot of small businesses pay more taxes than our large corporations. 7 of our 10 corporations in the state pay the $50 state minimum in state taxes. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. But I wonder, one of the constant things we hear from people, Republicans, is that what number will be enough? Prop 208 would have brought in less than $1 billion a year to fund education. Would that be enough? At what point are we?
I mean, let's try to get the money in there first, and then see if it's enough. I mean, I don't know the number. I've got no clue. Let's try to give teachers a proper wage, make sure that our students are getting the same funding that they're getting in states in the East Coast on a per student basis. We don't have to. I think we get scared a lot. Like there's not enough money to go around. There's like we're not going to have enough to fund all these wonderful things that we want. But there are literally billionaires out there. There are corporations making billions and billions of dollars, and they just have to share a little bit. We're really not asking for that much.
And you mentioned proper teacher pay. What would that be in your opinion? What's a reasonable goal for a starting salary for a first-year teacher up in the Flagstaff area?
I think $50,000 would be a good starting base pay for our Flagstaff teachers that I can throw, that I know is an increase from what they're currently getting.
Okay.
But again, I think just putting a number on it, we need to invest in we need to invest in public education. We're not investing.
I want to talk a little bit about ESAs as well. We were chatting before this started, and you mentioned that you were carrying some of the petitions for the referendum on the new ESA expansion law. I wonder, though, if you had the opportunity, would you want to do away with ESAs completely? Clearly, you want to repeal the new universal voucher law, but should we eliminate the program 100%?
Me personally, as a candidate, I believe we should completely eliminate the voucher program. It really is a way to just defund our public schools, and we talk about the special education aspect of it. I know some friends, children with autism and stuff, and so they use the voucher program because our public schools don't currently really offer the proper resources that those students need in all situations. But if we actually fully funded education, our public schools should provide those resources to those students. We should be able to work with all sorts of students, no matter their level. And if we fully invested in public education, we'd be able to give the best education possible to students with autism and on the spectrum or anything along these lines. So I think we should completely eliminate vouchers and fully invest in our public education system so they can offer all these special little things that we sometimes have to sub out to schools because for decades we have not invested in public education here in Arizona.
Okay. AEL, the aggregate expenditure limit, a cap that the voters put in place in 1980 saying that schools can only spend so much regardless of how much the legislature allocates to them. Should we send that back to the voters and ask them to eliminate that?
Sure. I think immediately now we need a special session before this next year starts. Our legislators need to get to work and get rid of the limit now so we can. But yeah, I think let's send it back to the voters. I mean, if that's how we get rid of it long term, right?
Okay. So lift it for this year, send it to the voters in the future. And then, Kyle, Arizona's Constitution requires college to be as nearly free as possible. Is it? And if not, how do you reel in tuition costs for Arizona students?
Well, I love that you asked that question. Higher education is not it's not as affordable as it has been in Arizona. Over the last decade, we've really seen the state legislature defund higher education. Like I mentioned in my opening brief, we fund the Department of Corrections more than every single university and community college in the state. And that's not what it was like 10 years ago. As a result of that funding, we've now seen the cost of in-state tuition for Arizona students nearly double just over the last decade. So we need to, stay true to our promise in the Arizona State Constitution. And I'm actually, I work with the Arizona Students Association, and we tried a ballot initiative this last year to try to get on the ballot called the As Nearly Free as Possible Act. And what that act would have done is it would have frozen in tuition for 4 consecutive years for any student that attends a public university, like the pledge program we have up at NAU and U of A. We'd lock it in for ASU. So those tuition rates are set for your whole 4 years at university. 2, we would tie any future increases to the cost of tuition to the cost of living, so that any future increases are tied to a set amount, not just willy-nilly based on what ABOR is willing to approve. And it also would kind of lock in the maximum increase for funding, because what we want to do is tie in Arizona residency, the funding structure. We want the Arizona state legislature to fund at least 50% of Arizona undergraduate tuition at a base level. And if they don't manage to make up that funding, I'd like to put a 2 percentage point surcharge to the corporate tax rate and have corporations make that investment for us. But that was kind of the funding structure that we came up with as the Arizona Students Association to really make a big lift in creating permanent funding for higher education here in the state and giving students what's the word I'm looking for? Making sure that students know what their cost of tuition rates will be for the whole time they're at university and making it more affordable.
Gotcha. Okay. So you mentioned earlier that you think that students should be required to wear masks in Arizona schools. How about COVID vaccines? Should that be mandatory for school enrollment as other vaccines are, or not?
Absolutely. COVID vaccine should be just like the other vaccines. And as far as pushing mandatory masks, I know that's not feasible and not something that will happen. I mean, it's not something that I would push for in the state legislature. I just think it's where we should be from a science and health standpoint. If we really wanted to take care of each other, we would be wearing our masks indoors to keep each other protected in spaces like classrooms and, I don't know, classrooms.
Fair enough. Okay, gotcha. Critical race theory. How do you define it, and do you support or oppose it?
Yeah, so critical race theory is a course that's taught over NAU. I know some students who take it. It cracks me up when we get people coming and they won't sign the little voucher thing because they're like, oh, I'm not sure about what's being taught in our schools, you know. We have school boards, you know, you can go volunteer in your kids' or grandkids' classroom. Like, the people who are pitching CRT are not connected to our public schools here in Arizona. They don't go volunteer in the classrooms. It's just a talking point that Republicans are using to try to scare people away from public education. It's part of the grift to push vouchers on us. I think I got my point across.
So do you think it sounds like you're saying that critical race theory is not being taught in, you know, K-12 public education systems?
What some Republicans are scared about and they call critical race theory is us teaching history. You know, like the fact that, well, teaching history. I don't want to.
Okay, fair enough. I also want to ask a little bit about school shootings. What, if anything, can the legislature, should the legislature be doing to prevent those tragedies from happening in Arizona?
It's common sense gun safety reform, universal background checks, not being able to buy an assault rifle at 18 years of age. You know, I think there's a lot of things that we can all agree on as Arizonans, and we talk about guns, and again, it's one of those things that gets tied into all this bullshit and shouldn't be political, but there's a lot of common sense things that folks agree on. I'm a Moms Demand Action gun sense candidate, and I really support the work that they are doing to make our schools safer and make our communities safer, because it's not just about school shootings as well, too. I mean, the majority of gun violence is, it happens in the home.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about environment, specifically water. A little bit of background. Arizona's water supply from the Colorado River has been severely curtailed due to ongoing drought. Where and how should the state find more water?
Well, not desalinization from a beach. I think we really need to continue to do what we have been doing for decades, and that's conserve water. Over the last 30 years, you know, Arizona's increased in population by a lot of people, but we haven't seen our use of water increase. And that's been through really heavy conservation efforts. That's been because we've been shifting away from farmland to housing as well, too. We've lost a lot of farmland that's really water intensive. But I think conservation is key. I think being very careful about what we are growing here in Arizona and how we're using water around our farms and agriculture is how we can continue to conserve and preserve water. But we can't create water. You know, we can't pull it out of nowhere and just make it where we want to. I wish we could. We need to continue to conserve and be smart. And that's what I got.
So talking about conservation, like, what new regulations would you support on conserving water? Because if you just tell people to conserve water, you're not going to accomplish anything. Or it's a very slow step-by-step process. I wonder if you would be willing to support policies like they've been trying in places like Las Vegas that are actually putting regulations on residential water use.
That specifically, I mean, sure, that's something I'd be open to. I will say that I'm not a water expert. You know, I have a decent background in education. I have some voting rights stuff, but very much, and I guess to any of the larger, broader issues as well, too, I'm going to rely on the organizations that have been doing the work. The Sierra Club is a leader environmental organization on water rights, and also we have the Morrison Institute out of ASU that has been doing water policy for decades. So if I do get elected, I'll make it my full-time job to get those answers and make sure that we're doing what we can. But I don't have a good answer for you as far as any specific policies that I could support.
Fair enough. Water is a very deep policy area. So let's talk a little bit about immigration. A lot of this stuff has been in the news recently. Governor Doug Ducey has been busing migrants from Arizona to Washington, D.C., along with a handful of other Republican governors. The mayors of D.C., New York, other places where these migrants are being shipped are not happy with this plan. Do you think that there's any place for this kind of an idea of moving some of the migrants who are coming from Mexico, Central South America into Arizona across the country, spreading them out so that Arizona isn't, and other border states aren't solely shouldering the burden of all these new people?
I mean, potentially it's something I'd be open to. I think the immigration conversation is another one of those things that's really just used as a political talking point by the Republicans. We have problems at the border that we need to address, but it's not swaths of illegals coming over and we don't need this border wall. And I guess the other thing I want to say about illegal immigration is we don't have the majority of folks who are illegal immigrants staying in this country. They've overstayed visas. They came in through planes and stuff. I think this idea that we have these millions of migrants coming in, waiting at the border wall, it's ridiculous, and it's dumb. We need to treat these people like human beings because they came here to have a better life. For decades, we had policy where we had much more open border between Mexico, and so people were able to just come and work temporarily for the seasons and then come back to Mexico. And with our policy now, folks are kind of forced to stay in one place or the other. Our immigration policy is very messed up. I don't have all the answers, but we need to treat people like human beings. I don't think that you or I deserve more or less out of America than someone who was born in Mexico just because of where you were born. This is supposed to be the greatest country in America, the land of the free, give me you're tired, you're broken, you're poor, all of this shit. This is what I was told the whole time I was growing up. And the way that we look at immigrants and talk about immigration here in Arizona is backwards.
And if I heard correctly, you said we don't need a border wall. Do you mean that as in we don't need a border wall?
Yeah. No, I'll say that. We don't need a border wall. It's stupid. It's a bad way to police the border.
Tear down the entire wall?
Sure.
Okay. I want to ask something about the 2020 election, but I'm trying to phrase this in a way that I think might get a more nuanced answer. So let's come back to that momentarily. In the meantime, let's talk a little bit about transparency, money in politics, life at the Capitol in general. One of the things that voters have asked is, how do you lessen the effect of money in political campaigns, or should you even work to lessen it?
I think you definitely should. I think the Arizona Clean Elections Program, I think all candidates should have to run under the Arizona Clean Elections Program. You have to go raise money from voters within your district, actually talk to people in your district. The money's, you're limited in what you can spend. So you have to be kind of smart about where you're spending money and how you're getting your message out. I think it creates some, I think then we have the potential for independent expenditures to come in and really dominate a race. But I think we really need to look into strengthening the Arizona Clean Elections Commission and getting more funding into that program. I think also what we have on the ballot this year, it's gone through a few: outlaw dark money, stop dirty money, whatever it is, that proposition, I think will be important as well in creating transparency. And so I urge folks to vote yes on Prop, whichever one that is. Hank,
11? Might be 211. Don't hold me to that. I just saw the sample ballots only today. So because of term limits, lobbyists end up sticking around the Capitol much longer than lawmakers, and they often kind of run circles around them. What do you think of term limits, and how, if at all, would you curtail lobbyist influence down at the Capitol?
I think that's interesting, and I'm going to dodge your question a little bit. I think currently we have term limits for Arizona state senators and state house representatives, right? They get their 2 terms, then they're termed out. But then they just, switch from the House to the Senate, or they take a year off and then they come back. I think it's more important to have an engaged citizenry and active voters than it is to have term limits. We need people paying attention to what is actually going on in the state legislature. The politicians who have been in office, they've been there for a while, and they are so corrupt. There's the one guy, I think, Goen, he tries to change the dates that we can sell fireworks every single year because he owns a fireworks company. There's the big charter school grift in Farnsworth. There's Wendy Rogers, who's raised $3 million saying the election is stolen. We have corrupt politicians in office. Term limits isn't going to fix that problem. Actively, engaged citizens and active voting is what's going to fix that problem, and not voting based on party line.
What about lobbyist influence? Is there anything we can do to curtail their kind of power over lawmakers at the Capitol?
It's interesting. I was having a conversation with someone who recently got elected, and so they've started to, have lobbying meetings and all that. And these lobbyists will represent like 20 different organizations, and like 10 on kind of one side of the spectrum and 10 on the other. And it's interesting. And also, the Arizona Students Association, we have a lobbyist as well. We go lobby to make higher education more accessible and affordable. Lobbyists are supposed to be these subject matter experts that really are able to provide a lot of information to politicians. And I think what we can do, so something that I always heard when we did our lobbying with ASA is that if you're a lobbyist and you got money, you get 30 minutes. If you're people, you bring people power, you get 15 minutes. And that's just a rough unwritten rule, but generally we need to spend more time as legislators talking to the people and the organizations that are passionate about these issues. I don't think there's any legislation or ethics rules or anything we need to do about our lobbyists. We just need better politicians.
Okay. And that leads right into the next question about ethics rules. Do lawmakers need better ethics rules? And if so, what do you propose? Like, what are the problems that you see that should be fixed?
Well, I think federally, there's a big conversation right now around the insider trading and all this that goes on. That's ridiculous. We obviously need ethics rules around that. The big problem with these ethics rules, we have some rules already in the state legislature. I could be wrong, but who enforces them? It is the state legislature and politicians and representatives. So when we have someone like Wendy Rogers, it is her own party who is in charge of censoring her and holding her accountable for the outlandish things that she's saying or doing. If there's the magic bullet, I'll sign on to it, whatever. I think ethics are important. We need them. But again, it comes down to these politicians are really, really corrupt, and we need better politicians, and we need a more active and engaged citizenry voting them in.
One thing that voters, this is probably the most frequent question we get from voters, is about Airbnbs, short-term rentals. Here's one example. Do you think investors should be able to operate commercial hospitality business in residential neighborhoods? What do you plan to do about this to help us residents? There's a dozen just like this. So shed a little light on your thinking into Airbnb, short-term rentals, and how Arizona should deal with this issue.
My thought around this is we have a lot of really different communities here in Arizona. I think Sedona's Airbnb issue is different than Flagstaff's Airbnb issue is different than Scottsdale and Mesa's Airbnb issue. We need to get rid of the current statewide restrictions that there are on our city and local governments making laws and regulations around Airbnbs and housing. And so I guess it's leave it up to the local cities and towns.
Okay. And we've hit our 30 minutes, but I do want to throw in one more here from a voter. What committees do you want to serve on and why, if elected?
I'd like to serve on the Education Committee because I think that's where some of my background is and where I have the strongest connections. And then the Government Committee to focus on voting rights and work around that, because I've done a lot of work registering college students to vote over these last 4 to 6 years. And I think coming from the voter registration side of things is a unique perspective to bring to the Government Elections Committee.
And it sounds like you don't, I did want to circle back to this. Sounds pretty clear to me that you don't believe the 2020 election was stolen. I guess maybe the way to phrase this question is so many people do believe that. What can you as a lawmaker, we as a society do to change that?
It's tough. I think a lot of the institutions are doing the work, trying to, maintain the fact that they have election integrity. The Maricopa County Recorder, run by a Republican, has been over, the switch to Adrian and now Stephen Richards. Like, they're doing the work to legitimize what they do, and both parties come together and work on elections all the time. And we can't just get rid of like the liars and grifters, and that's what we need to do. Like, there's people who are making millions of dollars saying the election was stolen. They have these people hooked on a conspiracy, and they're not going to stop because it's helping their motivations and causes. They continue to keep citizens uninformed about the larger wealth inequality and kind of major issues that are really hurting them in their daily lives. And I don't know, I'm blabbering. The election was like obviously not stolen, and it's ridiculous that people believe it. And the reason they believe it is because we have people who are spending millions of dollars telling them to believe it. And it sucks. Like, we're sliding into fascism. It's dangerous. I mean, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I wish there was a magic bullet. It's scary out there, Hank.
All right, we got one more from text message coming in here from a voter. In which of the counties in the new LD7 do you do most canvassing?
I do most of my canvassing up in Flagstaff because I live here. We try to do as much as possible in the more rural parts of the district, do a lot of events, but it's tougher to knock doors in the other parts of the district as well. We also will be starting doing a lot of really heavy focused door knocking in Apache Junction over these next few weeks. But if folks want to get plugged into our canvassing, go to the website www.nitschke4az/get involved, and we'll get you plugged into some of our door knocking. We like to knock with local school board candidates when we can. These last few weeks, every time we've been door knocking, we've been collecting petition signatures. But yeah, to find out more, get involved on the website. We'll reach out to you directly.
All right, cool. That makes a good kind of transition into, if you have any closing statements, want to recap, take a few minutes.
Cool. Well, I'll say my biggest three issues are education, the environment, and reproductive rights for all. In my district, this race is about turnout. We need to register new people to vote, and we need to get them and give them a reason to go vote this year. I love being a clean elections candidate. It's kept me from doing hours and hours of fundraising, and I've really been able to talk to a lot of voters. I want to implore folks to get involved in my website, www.nitschke4az.com/get involved. And I want to show off my campaign shirt. If folks get plugged into us, we'd love to get you a campaign shirt. They say, "Eat the rich, feed the people," and the back has our Kyle Nitschke for AZ State Senate logo. So come be a part of the campaign. We're having a lot of fun every day. We're spending a lot of time on NAU's college campus, but we're all throughout the district. We've got volunteers in most of the cities and towns throughout LD7. So please come get plugged in, come get involved, and give us a hand. This district is really about turnout, and we're going to win statewide no matter what this year. So thanks so much for your time.
Okay, that concludes our Q&A to our candidate. We thank you so much for participating. To the voters, we thank all of you who took the time to watch and inform yourselves before the November 8th general election. As a reminder, the voter registration deadline is October 11th, and early voting begins October 12th. All registered voters can participate in the general election, and we encourage you to visit azcleanelections.gov for official, accurate voting information. Thanks so much, Kyle, for making the time, and maybe I'll see you around.